The sonar signal came back wrong. Not distorted, not corrupted. Wrong in a way that made the lead researcher stop the playback, rewind it, and sit in silence for almost 2 minutes before saying anything. What the equipment detected at 36,000 feet below the surface of the Pacific Ocean wasn't rock formation, wasn't a thermal vent cluster, wasn't anything in the geological catalog they'd spent years building. It was geometry. And the question that's been quietly circulating in deep-sea research communities since that scan was processed isn't whether the equipment malfunctioned. It was tested, recalibrated, run again. The question is something far more uncomfortable. How does perfect geometric structure exist at the deepest point on Earth? A place with no light, no life capable of construction, and no human presence. Ever. There's a second question. One that doesn't get asked in press releases. Why did the official data summary describe the area as unremarkable sediment geology when the raw sonar file tells a completely different story? And a third, the team that conducted the scan hasn't spoken publicly about the anomaly. Not once. Their published findings make no reference to the geometry at all. In science, absence of mention is sometimes more interesting than the mention itself. This is what we know. This is what the data shows. And this is where the accepted explanation of the Mariana Trench, the one taught in textbooks, repeated in documentaries, cited in academic papers, starts to develop cracks. Let's establish what we're dealing with. The Mariana Trench is the deepest geographic feature on the surface of this planet. Located in the western Pacific Ocean, east of the Mariana Islands, it reaches a maximum depth of approximately 36,089 feet, nearly 7 miles below sea level. At that depth, the pressure is more than 1,000 times the standard atmospheric pressure. At the surface, the temperature hovers just above freezing. There is no sunlight. There has never been continuous human presence. The conditions are, by every measure, among the most hostile environments anywhere on Earth. We have explored less than 20% of it. That number is important. Remember it. Because when people hear Mariana Trench, they assume we understand it. They assume that because we've named it, mapped its general outline, lowered submersibles into it, we know what's down there. We don't. And the sonar data from the expedition we're about to walk through suggests that our ignorance may be far more significant than we've been led to believe. The expedition in question used a next-generation multi-beam sonar system, the kind that doesn't just ping depth but constructs a three-dimensional acoustic image of the seafloor with resolution fine enough to identify objects less than a meter across at full depth. This isn't Cold War-era equipment. This is mapping technology that was considered classified for naval use until relatively recently. The kind of system that, when it produces an anomaly, cannot easily be explained away as instrument error. The survey was targeting a section of the Challenger Deep, the deepest known point within the trench, to build baseline geological data for a broader Pacific floor mapping initiative, routine, in theory. The kind of mission that generates terabytes of data that researchers spend months analyzing after the fact. Except this one produced something on the third survey pass. The sonar return showed a structure, or more precisely, a set of structures, arranged with an internal regularity that does not match any known natural geological process. Not volcanic, not tectonic, not erosional. The angles were consistent. The spacing followed a pattern, and the pattern wasn't random. That last part is what matters. Nature produces complexity. Nature produces chaos with emergent patterns, snowflakes, crystal formations, columnar basalt that sometimes looks almost engineered. Scientists are trained to look for natural explanations first, and they're right to do that. But there are thresholds. There are measurements at which the probability of a natural explanation doesn't just decrease, it approaches something that makes rational people uncomfortable. This was past that threshold, but here's where it gets more complicated. Because the geometry wasn't the only anomaly. When the sonar data was being processed, a step that involves specialized software filtering raw acoustic returns into usable topographic maps, the processing team flagged something in the signal itself. Not in what the sonar hit. In how the signal returned. Sonar works by emitting sound pulses and measuring how long they take to bounce back, and from what angle. The math is precise. The returns from the anomalous structures came back with a reflection pattern inconsistent with the sediment or rock that should have been there based on the surrounding geology. In other words, whatever the sonar hit, it wasn't behaving acoustically like rock. It was denser, more uniform, and the surface, if you can call it that, returned the signal with an almost negligible scatter coefficient, meaning the surface was smooth, exceptionally smooth, at 36,000 feet. In a geological zone where nothing has any reason to be smooth. The researchers flagged this internally. The flag exists in the archive processing notes, which were obtained and reviewed by independent analysts outside the original team. Those notes use careful, scientific language, the kind of language researchers use when they want to document something without attaching their name to a conclusion that could end their career. The phrase used was, surface return properties inconsistent with expected lithological composition. Translation: this doesn't match the rock that should be here. Now let's steelman the conventional explanations, because the smarter the audience, the more important it is to do this honestly. Could this be a natural phenomenon we simply haven't documented before? Theoretically, yes. The deep ocean is not fully cataloged. Novel geological formations are discovered regularly. There are hydrothermal systems, chemical precipitation processes, and pressure-induced mineral behaviors at extreme depth that we don't fully understand. But here's the problem with that explanation, and this is where the story breaks. Natural geological formations, even unusual ones, do not produce consistent internal angular relationships. The structures detected in the Challenger Deep Anomaly Zone show repeated angular measurements in the 60 to 90 degree range, in 3 separate clusters, separated by distance but proportionally consistent with each other. In geology, that kind of repetition at scale has a name. It's called a constructed pattern, and it only happens in 2 known contexts: crystalline mineral growth at the microscopic level, or deliberate arrangement. The structures at the bottom of the Mariana Trench are not microscopic. Let that sit for a moment. This is the point in the investigation where most researchers stop publicly engaging, not because the evidence evaporates, because the implications of continuing to engage become professionally untenable. The deep ocean sits at the intersection of military interest, geopolitical resource competition, and academic funding structures, all of which create powerful incentives to suppress anomalous findings that don't fit operational or institutional narratives. We're not speculating about a conspiracy. We're describing a documented structural reality in how deep-sea research is funded, classified, and published. But the data didn't disappear. It was archived. And archives have a way of outlasting the institutional pressure that created them. The raw sonar files from the expedition were stored in a research database that, through a series of data governance changes at the hosting institution, became partially accessible to external researchers in the last several years. Not intentionally released. Accessible by procedural oversight. The kind of thing that happens in large bureaucratic data systems when priorities shift and nobody remembers to relock the door. Several independent researchers accessed those files. They processed the data independently using different software, different methodology, different assumptions. They got the same result. Here is where we need to talk about precedent. Because the Mariana Trench anomaly doesn't exist in isolation, and the pattern of what surrounds it is more disturbing than the structure itself. In 2003, a survey of the Pacific Deep Basin conducted by a joint oceanographic team documented unusual acoustic signatures at depth, described in the published paper as possible undocumented thermal vent activity. Unremarkable phrasing, buried in supplemental data. But the acoustic profile of a thermal vent is well established. It produces irregular diffuse returns. The signatures documented in that 2003 study were compact and directional, the opposite of vent behavior. The authors did not address that discrepancy in print. In 2011, an autonomous underwater vehicle operating in the deep Pacific, not in the Mariana Trench, but in an adjacent basin system, experienced an unexplained navigation failure during a bottom survey pass. The vehicle's onboard sensors recorded a localized magnetic anomaly of significant strength at a depth where no geological formation should be producing that kind of field disturbance. The incident was logged. The mission report attributed it to possible instrument calibration drift. The same vehicle, on a later mission, performed identically in all other conditions. In 2017, 3 years before the sonar anomaly that opens this story, a separate research team conducting a biological survey of the Hadal zone, the deepest ecological stratum of the trench, reported that their equipment was returning depth, readings inconsistent with the established bathymetric record for the area they were surveying. The seafloor in a specific coordinate range appeared, according to their instruments, to be several meters shallower than the official chart data indicated. They attributed it to chart error, but the chart data they were contradicting had been validated by 3 independent surveys over 30 years. None of these incidents taken alone is enough to support a single conclusion. Science is right to resist that kind of reasoning. Single anomalies get explained. Instrument errors happen. Charts get corrected, but this isn't one incident. It's a pattern, across decades, across different teams, different institutions, different equipment, different regions of the same geological system, and at the center of that pattern is a specific set of sonar returns from the deepest point on Earth, showing geometry that has no natural explanation on record, coming from a surface that is not behaving like rock, in a location that multiple prior expeditions documented as anomalous in ways that were never formally resolved. The question isn't whether something is there. The question is what it is, and how long it's been there. This is the part of the investigation where the nature of the inquiry shifts, because up to this point we've been dealing with physical measurements, data, acoustic returns and processing notes and archived files, empirical material that can be examined, debated, replicated. But the deeper question, the one that produces genuine unease, isn't geological, it's temporal. The Mariana Trench has existed in roughly its current form for approximately 180 million years. It is one of the oldest continuous geological features on Earth. The Pacific Plate has been subducting beneath the Mariana Plate for longer than mammals have existed. The floor of the Challenger Deep has been in darkness, under pressure, essentially, unchanged, since before the first dinosaur went extinct. If there is structure down there, if the geometry is real, and the sonar data says it is, then the question of when it got there becomes the most important question in the room. Because there are only 2 possible categories of answer. Either the structure is natural in a way we do not yet understand, or it was placed there, and if it was placed there by anything at any point in time, then what we think we know about this planet's history, about what has existed here, about what is possible at the extreme edge of Earth's geography, is incomplete in a way that cannot be addressed with a footnote. Here is what the independent analysis of the sonar data produced as its most concrete finding. The structures are arranged in 3 groupings. Each grouping contains between 4 and 7 discrete objects. The objects within each grouping are separated by distances that follow a consistent mathematical ratio. That ratio, when expressed as a proportion, is not novel. It appears in natural crystalline structures, yes, but it also appears in constructed architecture, in ancient built environments across multiple unconnected civilizations, in engineering applications where load distribution and structural integrity are the design priorities. The ratio is not proof of construction, but it is a signature, and signatures mean something. The depth-corrected acoustic models produced by the independent researchers suggest the structures have a vertical dimension. They rise off the seafloor of between 8 and 40 meters. The largest grouping occupies a surface area the independent team estimated at roughly 2 hectares, at 36,000 feet below sea level, with a surface so smooth the sonar signal barely scattered. Now here is the final layer, the one that was deliberately held back until this point in the investigation, because it recontextualizes everything that came before it. The coordinate range of the sonar anomaly is not random geography. It sits within a zone of the Challenger Deep that has attracted disproportionate naval monitoring interest since the early 1990s. That monitoring interest is documented, not in declassified reports, not in leaked files, but in the public record of vessel traffic, acoustic research station placement, and the frequency of survey missions from military-adjacent oceanographic programs in that specific region. There is no publicly stated reason for that level of monitoring interest in that specific zone. But monitoring systems don't get placed without reason. Naval acoustic arrays don't get positioned to watch an empty piece of seafloor. Resources don't get allocated to watch nothing for 30 years. Someone has known this zone was worth watching. The question is what they've been watching it for. The official position, from every institution with formal involvement in deep-sea research in that region, is that the Mariana Trench, including the Challenger Deep, is a geological feature of natural origin whose seafloor is composed of accumulated sediment and basaltic rock, with no structures of non-natural origin present or theorized. That position has not changed. The sonar data has not been publicly addressed. The processing notes have not been formally responded to. The independent researchers who analyzed the raw files and produced consistent findings across multiple methodologies have not been invited to present their work at any major oceanographic conference. Science has a formal mechanism for handling anomalous findings. It's called peer review, it's called replication, it's called open data sharing and methodological transparency. None of those mechanisms have been applied to the Mariana Trench geometry anomaly, and in a field as data-hungry and intellectually competitive as deep-sea research, where anomalous findings are normally seized upon as publication opportunities, as career-making discoveries, as leverage for research funding, the silence around this specific anomaly is the loudest sound in the room. There is one final data point. It doesn't prove anything, but it does not let you go. In the months following the expedition that produced the anomalous sonar returns, one of the junior researchers on the processing team, not a senior scientist, not anyone with institutional standing to protect, made a single public statement on an academic forum. It was not dramatic. It did not claim to reveal anything classified. It simply noted that during the data processing phase, the team had encountered returns they could not categorize, and that they had been advised by senior staff to document but not interpret the relevant segments. Document but not interpret. In research terms, that phrase has a specific meaning. It means the observation is real enough to record, and the interpretation is too consequential to commit to. The post was later deleted. The account was deactivated. Here is where we land. Not with an answer, with a wait. The Mariana Trench is the deepest, most inaccessible, most pressure-extreme environment on this planet. It is, by every conventional measure, the last place where structure of this kind should exist. It is the last place where smooth surfaces and consistent geometry and mathematically patterned arrangement should appear in the acoustic record, and yet, the sonar doesn't lie. Physics doesn't negotiate. And the independent verification of those returns by multiple researchers using separate methodology removes the comfortable explanation of equipment failure. Something is at the bottom of the Challenger Deep that does not belong there by any model of natural geology we currently possess. Whether it has been there for 1,000 years or 100 million, we don't know. Whether it is the remnant of something we have no framework to understand, or the product of a process we haven't discovered yet, we don't know. Whether the institutional silence around it is bureaucratic inertia or something more deliberate, we don't know, but we know the data exists. We know the geometry is real. We know that the people closest to the evidence were told to document it and say nothing. And we know that the deepest point on Earth, the place we were most confident, held no secrets. Maybe the place where the largest secret of all has been sitting undisturbed, in the dark, for longer than we can comfortably imagine.